It's time we talk a little Tango Shalom. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore, and it is my duty every week, twice a week, sometimes more, to tell you about independent films that you have to check out of all types: documentaries, indie sci-fi, horror films, and films like Tango Shalom. I am pleased today to be joined by the director of Tango Shalom, Gabe Bologna, and producer-editor, my friend, Robert Meyer Burnett, my friend from all the way back to the 90s, back to Sci-Fi Universe magazine, which is how we met through Mark Altman, and then your amazing film, Free Enterprise, which I appear in briefly, about this much. I'm in the movie.
But you're in it.
I'm in it. It doesn't matter. I think it's on IMDb. This movie, Tango Shalom, definitely put it in the category of like a My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? Like it's that kind of like cultural experience, sort of a clash of cultures. And then also just, it's a beautiful film. I would describe it as a family film, but not in the gentrified, kind of, it's a family film that both adults and kids can enjoy. It's innocent and touches on all sorts of topics. Where did Tango Shalom come from? The whole concept for the film, Gabe?
Well, the two brothers in the movie are actually brothers in real life, Jose and Claudio Lagnato. Jose is very much like his character in the film. He's got many kids. He's an observant Jew. He also tangos, and he kind of based it off his life. Him and his brother are refugees from Egypt. They were Jews who were forced to flee, after the birth of Israel. And the only country that would take them in was Argentina. And they would tell me the stories, how they would hear beautiful tango music, wafting outside of their window. And they would sit outside and watch people dance the tango in the street. And, they're both avid tango dancers. And yes, this is a dance movie. Yes, it's a Jewish film, but it's something that everybody relates to because it goes straight to the heart of an episode that all of us have had in our life. Have you ever just come to a brick wall on a one-way street, right, that leads to a dead end? Have you ever held a Gordian knot in your hand or tried to rewrite the Kobayashi Maru, right? We've all been in that place where there is a dilemma that is so massive that you say to yourself, there is no way in hell I can get around it, I can get through it, or overcome it. And Moshe Yehuda is an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who, in order to save his Hebrew school from financial ruin, he enters a dance competition with a very attractive dance partner. But how does he do it? How do you enter the competition when your religion dictates that you can't touch another woman? And we may not have had that specific experience, but we all can at least say we've had one just massive obstacle that we couldn't get through, right? And I think that's why we're all relating to this character. And this entire movie, Rob will tell you, had one massive obstacle that you couldn't get out from under, you couldn't go through, you couldn't, you couldn't solve without a whole bottle of vodka, right?
We had that too.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We start shooting. Right before we start shooting, my father gets diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's a lead in the film. Jonathan Gold, that great reviewer for the New York Times, the food critic, LA Times, he died 2 weeks after diagnosis, right? So we said to ourselves, what do we do? This is my father. This is a script he wrote. He was a lapsed Catholic who wrote the role of a priest that he is to be in. So I said to Jose and Claudia, who also co-financed the film, what do you suggest? And they said, okay, let's shoot the entire movie around Joe Bologna's chemo and radiation therapy. Now, as you know, you don't rebound from chemo and radiation, let alone the Whipple surgery, overnight. And they're not all done at once. So over the course of years, 3.5 years of shooting, we would put my father back together, get him on screen. He'd go back into chemo and the whole rigmarole. And he ended up living like far longer than anybody with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And that was just one of the issues that we had to deal with in this film.
And the film is a loving tribute to him.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it's his best role that he's played. And one of the scenes he did literally the day before surgery. And I said to him, Dad, I feel so bad that we're shooting right before you got to go into surgery. He said, are you kidding me? I would have lost my mind if I didn't have something to get my mind off it, But we've all had these types of experiences in our life where you look in every direction and there's no way out. Yogi Berra had this great saying. He said, when you see a fork in the road, take it. Right? Sometimes you don't have a choice of which way to go, but maybe just a choice alone is enough to get you through this dilemma, this nightmare, whatever it is.
He also said, it's not over till it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, he had many good phrases, but, and Rob, you are a producer on the film. You're also the editor. Tell me about your involvement and also your friendship with Gabe. And you guys have been friends for years.
Well, it's because it was forged by this movie. It was very funny. I actually met one of our actresses, Judy Beecher, waiting for my car at the Roosevelt Hotel. She was there at an American Film Market event, and they had no editor on this film. And there was just nobody editing the movie. They had a previous editor that had worked on a few scenes, Giovanni, right, Gabe?
Yeah.
And he'd done some stuff, but then he had to leave, and so there was very little had been done on this film at all. And then I knew Gabe not at all. I called him up, and we had a sake-soaked lunch for like 3 hours, talking about movies and talking about the film, and a sake-soaked sushi lunch. We ate a lot of sushi on the making of this movie, and we became fast friends. And he was like, "You should come on board." And so I came on board the film, and it was obvious that there was a lot of just production issues, as there are with a lot of low budget films. One of the things that we had to surmount was when they were shooting the climactic dance sequence, some of the footage had been damaged. And there was a power surge because, when you're making a movie with baling wire and duct tape to get things done, you cut corners whenever you can. And so there was a lot of significant footage. It was missing every other frame or every third frame. And I'd never seen anything like that before because it was strange. You on every movie you come up with something. So we had to figure out, like, a lot of it was dialogue. It was plot driven. It was part of the end of the climax of the movie. And how do you make that work? And it turned out that one of the things that we did crafting the film was the end of the movie, the whole climactic sequence. We jump around all these different characters, observing this competition, and then our characters that are in the competition. And by having all of these, it actually drove the editorial process because we were able to cut around the damaged footage and make it work. And I think it also helped the whole climax of the movie because it forced us to cut a little bit more than maybe we would have, but we crafted the film around that. And like so many independent movies, that's what you do. You're thrown an obstacle and you figure out a way to surmount it. And I think from an artistic standpoint, it actually worked for us. And we had a lot of that in the film. There was a lot of
the fact that Rob brought up the big dance competition and one of our Kobayashi Maru moments, but there was even another such experience during that dance competition that it was like the Yogi Berra line. You just had to take the fork in the road. We had a certain amount of money to do a dazzling multi-camera shoot of a televised dance competition. But every way we did the math, we said we either use high-grade cameras that's equal to the red camera that we used
For the rest of the movie.
For the rest of the entire shoot, and a subpar crew, skeletal subpar crew, 5-camera shoot, but great cameras. Or cameras from every resolution under the sun, like I'm talking like HD to the Dragon Red, right? And with a spectacular crew. Both solutions were ridiculous. Both of them were stupid. But we only had 2 choices. So what did I choose? I choose a great crew and cameras of different resolutions. Well, that scene was so scary to get to. Rob and I did not get to it for a long time. One, it was the finale. So naturally, we got to put it off naturally. But also there was the corrupted footage. We were trying to retrieve some of that footage from it. And what ended up happening? We ended up coming to a moment where they invented an application that raises the resolution of different subpar cameras. And then they could be equalized.
Well,
right? So in other words, just enough of time went by before we realized that the right decision was actually made. And it's another example in life. There are times where you just have to make a choice. And by the way, that's just some of what we went through. My goodness, we're in post-production and COVID hits. I mean, we're the only people on earth to do film festival circuit during the worst pandemic in 100 years. Okay, there wasn't even a film industry 100 years ago. We're on like Zoom film festivals.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, everything that we encountered with this movie was just obstacle after obstacle after obstacle.
I have to just chime in from a technical standpoint. So people might be asking, like, what exactly do you mean? Like Gabe said, most of the film was shot on reds at native 5K. The dance competition was shot in 4K, 2.5K, 2K, and HD, and mostly on Blackmagic cameras. The problem is, with lower resolutions, the color space never matches. So we're intercutting all of these shots, fast cutting, and I was frankly terrified. I'm like, having worked on projects where you're trying to DSLR and match it with red cameras, it never looks the same. So it turns out 3 years on in the editorial process, Blackmagic came out with a new software, and that's what I did. I transcoded, not all of it was Blackmagic, but most of it was. I had to go back into our edit, and there was so many cuts. I was like, this is going to be a monumental pain in the ass. But I used their new software, and I retranscoded all of their original Blackmagic footage that we shot years prior. And it gave us that extra area of color space. So it's not just Rec 709, where we actually were able to make the colors match. And I got to give a shout out to Randy Kuhnfield, our colorist at Blue Line Post, because man, I spent the whole time in post, and it was years in post. I was terrified of this. I'm like, this dance, and our lead actress is wearing a red dress, and like that's a very difficult color to not have look equal.
Sometimes the red looked salmon pink. Sometimes it looked blood crimson.
Sometimes it made me want to blow my head off.
Yeah,
that's how terrible.
And by the way, I was about to give a spoiler away.
Yeah, don't give a spoiler away.
Okay.
There's a very clever. I mean, you were talking earlier about how do you remain faithful to your faith, and then do something that's a very intimate form of dance, and it's handled very cleverly in the film in a very sweet way. So it's funny because the final chunk of the film is the most exciting aspect. I mean, he's learning to dance. Now it's this big competition. Everything's on the line. And actually seeing those intercuts from all the different people watching, it just heightened it. I don't need to see every minute of every dance. The fact that you like are able to do that, and actually, I mean, whatever, if you thought it was a mistake or whatnot, it actually made the film. It made it really exciting to like see the constant cutting around to people's reactions.
You're so right. You're so right. I mean, everything works out in the end if you just stay on it, you know.
Yeah.
And it was. I mean, these were things like, I'll give you an example. Gabe gave me a lot of leeway as a lot of creative input. And one of the things that I've loved about working with Gabe is like, if we didn't like something, we would try our ideas. Like, let's try this, let's try that. If it didn't work, we were always focused on what can we do to make the film better. You know, like a lot of time when you collaborate with people want their ideas to succeed. But when you're making a movie, to me, the film should always define what works and what doesn't. Right. So I think we had a really great a years-long collaboration where we were able to make this film work, because it was always the film itself that drove us and defined us in terms of what creative decisions we were making.
But I have to ask one weird oddball question, and maybe this is just my brain. I think there's a reference to Star Trek the Motion Picture in this movie, and I think it's in a scene in, I want to say, a medical bay, but that would be incorrect, where a character's voice is modulated in a certain way that sounds like Ilea. Am I wrong?
Well, I actually love that filter, by the way.
Okay.
It's like old school.
Did you do that?
I know exactly what you're talking about. I wouldn't say it was necessarily intentional, but once it happened, I was like, let's leave that. Let's leave it there.
I don't know. It's the combination of the read and then also just the way that the sound was tweaked. Sound. I was just like that. It just popped into my head. I'm like, wait a second. Okay, good. See, I love that though, when filmmakers will kind of just put in a little something if you're paying attention. You know what I mean? I mean, it's always fun. Now the festival, you did a festival run. The movie's now out in commercial release, video on demand, successful theatrical run that has gained momentum. I think that's always great when a movie is, coming out during challenging times, but still gaining an audience. And I do think that there's something about this film. It's not technically a holiday film per se, but because of the sort of cultural aspect and the dance aspect, I see this movie like gaining a fan following. Do you know what I mean? Like it sort of has that quality, and especially, what was there? I've seen articles where they talk about like movies where people eat a lot in the movie end up becoming like really popular over time. That's like a whole subgenre unto itself of like indie movies where people eat a lot, and specifically cultural types of foods, right? So I just see this gaining momentum. It's on video on demand. Tell me a little bit about this journey on the festivals. It must have been a hit. I mean, regardless of whether they were virtual or not, it must have been very popular.
We were really surprised during the festival run that everyone was telling us how timely the movie was. And Rob and I were just looking at each other, just like at a complete loss, because this movie took forever to make. It took forever to make, okay? And the reason they said it was timely is there were elements in there that suddenly spoke to people. The fact that a Muslim imam is helping his Jewish friend find a way to dance the tango without sacrificing his belief, with the help of also an Indian mystic and a Catholic priest. And there's this wonderful line that Karina has that, honestly, when shooting it, by the way, that fortunately God, Hashem, did not destroy that footage because we shot it on that day. Rabbi Moshe Yehuda says, "What do you believe in?" And she says, "I believe people should be kind to one another." And we would be in virtual screenings and we would hear people go, "Oh." I mean, we've just come out of the most brutal couple of years we have ever seen. I mean, the darkest age in my lifetime. I mean, where you read online what people say about each other. We watched a very, very painful exploration of our, democratic system. And people were saying, you know what? I kind of like feeling good. I'm also getting a lot back where they feel that a lot of the comedies now are very mean-spirited. There's a lot of nihilism in the humor, right? And this was like a throwback to maybe a kinder age. Maybe it's an age that we would like to get back, somehow. And that's why I think it's doing well for, an independent film in the box office, is because it just became current. This movie that we couldn't figure out how to fix seemed to just come together in a way that people were telling us, how do you know how to make something that spoke to me in such a way?
It's almost in contrast to everything else out there that is dark and mean-spirited and whatnot. And people forget that when the original Star Wars came out in 1977, George Lucas, his intention was like, I want to make a fairy tale for kids because all the stuff coming out is really dark, right? And it was a dark era in our history. So when Star Wars came out, it's just like, oh, it's just fun and it's a fairy tale. Effectively, it's and I feel like Tango Shalom, definitely having seen as many independent films as I see, which always tend to explore, they're not necessarily dark films, but the topics can be dark, right? Whether it's everything from drug addiction or just like run the gamut of just like awful things happening in the world. Tango Shalom just completely stands in contrast to all of that, right? It's there are just very few films like it that are out in the marketplace. So I have to give both of you credit for sticking to your guns and getting this out into the world, not just on video on demand, but also the theatrical experience, which I hope, will continue. I hope movie theaters will come back in a way that they'll be just as profitable as they were before. Everyone just says the before times, right? I think that's now become a common phrase. It's the before times, when things were normal, and maybe we'll get back there someday. But I'm ecstatic for the success of the film. What else can you tell me about some of the other challenges in making the film? I mean, the dance numbers are great. There's also, it's subtly sexy. It's not overtly sexy. I'd say a couple of the outfits, that red outfit in particular you're talking about before, was like a kind of moment. Little Tex Avery eyes went out there for a second. But what were some of the other challenges that you faced? It seems like you just faced so many from.
Well, there was something that took us completely by surprise in the editing room. Rob and I turned to each other. We said, this movie is actually sexy. Like, we were just laughing at the whole premise of it. And there's some really, really funny scenes in it. But once we realized that the dance sequences, the fact that they couldn't touch, right? And here we are coming out of this era where people can't touch, right? Thanks to our lovely experience with this pandemic, we realized we had to have this movie scored to picture. Now, my wife, who's a composer, Gabe Bologna, and her composing partner, a woman named Zoe Tiganoria, who's a renowned virtuoso accordion player, they scored the film to picture. Okay.
So that means
this has never been done in the history of any
version.
dance movie. Why? Think about it. You write a song, you choreograph to the song, you shoot that, right? Maybe you'll do a playback, right? And then you put it back into the film. Well, we realized that we need every glance, every kick, every raise of the eyebrow, heightening this sensuality, right? That we tried something that had never been done before. So we got a choir, believing in the Vatican, to really pump it up. We had a symphony orchestra in Athens, and what ended up happening is a musical life took over. And I can't think of the last time there's been a film where the music, the sound designed, Steve Yeaman was our sound designer, and picture. So sound and picture were equal in each other. And there was a very important interreligious element, right? We had different cultures and religions expressing music in different ways, right? And even in the mosque, the call to prayer is a very has a very beautiful modality, and all of those had to be weaved into this story, and it had to be done right. It couldn't be a hodgepodge. It had to have its own life of its own. And people have, I think the greatest compliment I've gotten is people say, I sing the songs from the film. We found this Jewish klezmer punk band, a bunch of millennial klezmer punk singers. They're called Golem. They gave us 11 songs. Honestly, I mean, these people, they're going to blow up. I mean, they have a following, you know, a little bit in Brooklyn here, where they play, a little bit in Queens there. But I'm telling you, people are just blown away by this band. They even perform at the end. So it's a very musical film. And I think it's another element that slowed us down a bit is we just got a little bit too ambitious. I'll give an example. Just a couple days ago on Yom Kippur, you want to tell him, Rob?
I'm not sure which story you're referring to.
The UN.
Oh, so the UN, UNESCO, the educational division of the United Nations, they tweeted out about our film. Like, I was looking at
the
Twitter.
Official page on Twitter.
Wow.
United Nations, UNESCO, multiple tweets.
And then they tweeted it out again on Monday. So this is on Friday, and then on Monday they're tweeting out about our film. They're going to give it an award for its the interfaith dialogue that the movie promotes.
Yeah, they're putting us in their compendium of interreligious dialogue. It's called Good Practices, and that's just one of the many endorsements. We have a Vatican Archbishop named Archbishop Felix Machado, who has endorsed our film. He said that it inspired him. The Palestinian Bishop of Jerusalem, countless Muslim organizations. Oh, by the way, not to mention the Church of England. Okay, the office of the Archbishop of Canterbury. They even gave us their logo. Okay. By the way, if you heard of the Crusades and that whole thing that happened, Richard the Lionhearted. Okay, so here we have the Church of England, a Muslim organization, and just yesterday, Rube Hall's
Drag
Race, his official production company, World of Wonder, just Instagrammed us and posted us because we have a message of inclusion. And every religion, I mean, Rube Hall, I mean, we have now an army of people from all walks of life that are embracing this movie. There's like, we're kind of like verklempt about the whole thing, to speak Yiddish.
Well, also, you know, I was surprised that obviously the main character in this film is a Hasidic rabbi, and yet the film played a film festival in Turkey, which is a predominantly Muslim nation, where we received a number of awards. And then, as far as we know, the first comedy film festival in the Islamic world, which was in Morocco, I think it's called the Rabat Film Festival. It won the audience award. Wow. And I was blown away by this, you know, and it really does prove that, you know, through entertainment, we can share our own stories, and people will listen. You know, I've always thought that one of the great things about the magic of cinema, and this is what I believe about cinemas themselves. I don't mean movies, but I mean walking into a cinema. You know, you sit in a darkened room with a bunch of people you don't know, people from all walks of life, all different religious backgrounds, different sexualities, different races, whatever. And you're all there to do the same thing, which is experience a story. And when the lights go down, you don't care who you're sitting next to. All you care about is what's up on the screen. And I've been very surprised by the reaction that this, you know, you're toiling away on this little tiny independent movie that had a lot of production difficulties, and you don't know how it's going to be received. But I mean, our world premiere was in Jaipur, India, at a festival. I'm like, how did that happen? You know, and it's been very gratifying, all the work. I mean, because Gabe and I never came out from our little dark room where we're sitting at the screen. Part of it was the screen I'm talking to you on right now for a number of years. And then to have it come out and have people from all walks of life like what is admittedly, it's a very independent, it's a small movie with a big heart.
I think that's the best way to put it. And it's also something that has a timeless quality about it because of the message. And it doesn't, I mean, you mentioned inclusion, but it doesn't feel like there's the way that Hollywood does sort of diversity and inclusion, which feels forced and like ticking boxes. But independent film for years has always done this, but in a way that was organic because it was in service of the story, not in service of something we think we have to do to serve a market. It's like it serves the story, right? And that's why it feels so, there's an authenticity to it that I think is going to make this a movie that is like this one that just sort of like comes up. It feels like, this is a weird to say, but it feels like a holiday movie to me in that sense, where it's just like, get together like once a year and experience this with the family, and with the family in the sense of like, not like it's like, well, this is for, you know, one market or one demographic kids, and this is just for the adults. It's like, no, this is for everybody, because there's everybody kind of represented. You know, the kids in the film, they're charming and entertaining, and I don't know, it really works for me. I don't want to give away any kind of spoilers or anything, but the movie kind of like, you feel like it's over. It's not. It continues, and there's a scene that's the sort of the end of the movie, and it just goes on in a way that just is, I feel that was so necessary. Someone else might have said, some other editor or a studio might say, hey, you don't need that. But I felt that the feeling that it left you with after that is so spot on, so perfect, that I'm glad it played out the way it did. I'm talking around it, obviously, but it's just incredibly worthwhile.
Yeah, you know, Joe Zwick, who made My Big Fat Greek Wedding, he was our producer.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, you know, we're going to go shoot in 770. There's never been a narrative film that's ever shot in the seat of the Lubavitch, movement. It's the real deal, the synagogue, you know. And I said, you know, I hope the world is going to be able to identify with it. And he said to me, Gabe, the more specific you tell a story, the wider the appeal. And I was like, you're so right. When you water down any story, you lose everybody. But the more specific your story is, the more everybody relates to it. So when we shot in the Sikh temple, I asked the Sikh priest if we could actually shoot his actual congregation. And I was ready to start negotiating with him about, you know, how much he would charge for this very brief but very important scene that involved all the Sikhs in the congregation. And he said, everyone in my congregation will work for free in return for an IMDb credit. So we have more Indian names in our film than any Bollywood film. You know?
I would like to speak to that, what you were just saying. There's been some criticism in the film, I take it personally, you know, as an editor, that people said that there was too many second unit shots of religious iconography in the movie. And there were moments where Moshe walks into another criticism. I think a lot of people don't get that this movie is a fable. And normally an Orthodox rabbi wouldn't necessarily go into a Catholic church, but because it's a movie and because he sees an act of kindness by Father Anthony, he goes into this. And when you go into these different, I consider them realms, alien worlds. So Moshe's never gone into a Catholic church. So we do have a lot of shots that were shot, not second unit, but by the main unit, of religious iconography. So when you go into the Catholic church and then you go into the Sikh temple, we wanted to give a flavor of the different iconographies and the different things that went on inside these areas. Same with 770, that yet have a similarity. There's a commonality to all the world's religions. And even though people might do things in a different way, there's a lot more similarity than there are differences. And I would hope that would be sort of seen through the visual representation of these realms. And that's how I felt when I was cutting.
Just like in Star Trek, right? You've got the Vulcan planet, right? What's the one that's got all the numbers in the name?
There's the Binar planet from the episode 11001001.
There's the Binar planet.
The Borg. There's the Borg. There's all. They don't even really have a planet, but yeah.
And that was.
that was
Googling. That was another thing too. I mean, Chris, you mentioned the end of the film.
Janus 6.
Janus with Devil in the Dark.
And Wolf. Oh yeah, that's it. Wolf 359.
Yeah. That was a bad things happen at Wolf 359.
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
But there was one thing in the film. We have these different religious leaders, and this is how iterative this process was. I said to Gabe, I said, I don't want to ruin anything, but one of our characters doesn't appear at the very end of the movie, which is what you were talking about, Chris. And I said to Gabe, I go, I had this idea, I think we need to figure out a way to show him. And I kind of pitched Gabe an idea, how could we bring this character that isn't in the end of the movie? How could we make it work? And Gabe looked at me and he was like, I'll go do that. And Gabe flew to New York and tracked down this actor and shot this bit that I think makes it really solidifies, Chris, what you were talking about, the end of the movie, where you get to see all of our religious leaders together.
You need that. You need that at the end. It's the perfect epilogue. Gentlemen, Tango Shalom is a delight. It's more than a family film. Obviously, the United Nations recognizes it. This movie, the importance, but it's also at the end of the day, it's also incredibly entertaining and heartwarming. It really is. I mean, it may be a little indie movie, but as you said, Rob, it has a big heart. Thank you for joining me on the Film Threat podcast to talk about Tango Shalom. I hope we can do something like a watch party.
Yeah,
I hope we can do a watch party at some point, because this is the perfect film to do it with. Again, congratulations on the movie.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thanks.